Independence Day marks the day that the Continental Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. But do you ever wonder why they chose to do it at that time? Not the stuff everybody knows about, like no taxation without representation or the Boston Massacre. What I mean is, Virginia had been an English colony since 1607, and there really hadn't been any problems. So why, suddenly after 170 years, was there all this beef with England? The reason is often left out of high school history classes, and that reason is because for nearly a century and a half, England didn't care at all about the American colonies until all of a sudden they did. So for most of the history of the American colonies, England had enacted a policy called salutary neglect, sometimes called benign neglect. Basically, the idea was England wasn't really in a position to handle the day-to-day governing of a territory larger than their whole country across a massive ocean. This was not cell phone times, this was horse and sailboat times. It could take months for England to even find out about a problem in the colonies that needed to be addressed, let alone pass a law to fix it. So England basically said, look, y'all are free to do what you want. Form your own governments, collect your own taxes. In exchange, the colonies will trade with England will trade with the colonies, and everybody's gonna make a lot of money. And they did. For over 100 years, England largely stayed out of colony affairs, and the colonies blossomed into economic powerhouses, while England became the most powerful nation on the planet. So what changed? Well, in the 1750s, some English colonists and some French colonists got into a scuffle over disputed territory in the Ohio area. In America, we call this the French and Indian War, but the rest of the world calls it the 7 Years' War. That's because that little scrap in Ohio caused some long-standing tensions to snap, which kicked off a war involving every major European power in battles that broke out across Europe, North America, South America, Africa, Asia, I mean everywhere, man. Some historians call this World War Zero. When it was all said and done, England won, but it was a costly war. So in the 1760s, English Parliament decided they needed to refill the coffers quickly and started eyeballing the American colonies as a possible revenue stream. They decided to ditch the policy of salutary neglect and pass the stamp tax, basically to force colonists to chip in for the war costs. But colonists were like, what is this? I thought we had an agreement. Colonists protested and boycotted, and eventually the stamp tax was repealed. Turns out leaving the colonies alone for so long caused the American colonists to get used to ruling themselves. But after the colonists forced the repeal, Parliament started thinking that maybe they were getting a little too big for their britches. Rather than trying to figure out a subtle way to shift the colonies away from the salutary neglect policy, Parliament decided to double down and cram the change down colonists' throat with laws designed to punish dissension. That's why after over a century of peace, all of a sudden the colonists in England started getting into the fights that would eventually lead to the American Revolution. Now in the US, the policy of salutary neglect is largely looked at as a smart policy that led to quick growth in the colonies, but in England it's looked at as a disastrous policy that basically caused England to bankroll the formation of another country. So there's a little backstory that people rarely talk about in the American history books. I'm John Soboleski for Reckon. If you like these videos and like what we're doing on Reckon, you can help us out by following us on Reckon by AL.com on Facebook and Twitter. And for even more news, you can subscribe to our newsletter at AL.com/Reckon. Thanks for watching.